Dun, dun, dun. Hello and welcome everybody to A Gift of Story. This is something that came out of me really just wanting to gather with people that I love and share stories. And then it was like, we should invite other people to be a part of this. And then people from all over the world are now a part of this. So I'm ecstatic. I am so grateful for each and every one of you. I've been thinking about what a significant thing it is to offer your time, even with free events. When you show up, like, to bring yourself and be here with us for a period of time is a huge gift for us. So I just want you to know how much I appreciate each of you being here and offering us these moments of your time, and specifically around the medicine that story has been for me. And I'm sure you guys can speak to this as well. We don't realize, I think, until I don't say we hit a certain age, we just hit a certain part in our own life story and we recognize the very interesting patterns and chapters that we've lived. And we recognize how so many stories have been a part of us and working on us and weaving through our experience of being human. And all of a sudden we kind of recognize that we're in this profound world story, and then our own little story, and then all the stories that intersect with one another, and then some of these, old ones that just kind of keep coming back for us, and the new ones that are being born from this next generation of storytellers. And it's just, I can't imagine humanity without story. I think one of our lifeblood pieces is the way that we navigate hard things. It's the way that we celebrate. It's the way that we remember. And so I chose to bring a story that has worked on me differently every year for a long time. Jenny's bringing a story that links back to her ancestral lines. Sam's bringing a story that she wrote. Chrissy's bringing a story that was written for her. And it's just like, I feel like it's such a special collection of mythic imagery that's going to come through for each of us. And so my invitation, should you choose to accept it, is maybe it's an idea. Have something to write with nearby so that if something stands out in the story, you can jot it down. I feel like with every time I hear, even if I've heard the story a few times, when I hear a certain part, that part sticks. And it stays, and it almost like replays like a movie in my mind. To me, and this is something that I am working with my teacher, Danielle Dolsky, she's been really significant in the recognition for me of mythic imagery and how much they are almost like vision pieces for your own quest. It's like, why is it that swan that's the only thing I just keep thinking of, that swan? There's something in that for you. And I feel like that's kind of the extracted wisdom or the medicine that we can each take, is maybe one mythic image from each story that stands out. And then maybe you do something with it, whether that's make a piece of art, stick it in a sticky note near your bedside, and when you go to sleep, ask the Dreamweaver for a little more clarity on it if you desire. Like, those kinds of things you can do. But if you desire to have this be a little bit more interactive with us, you're welcome to pop it in the chat what the strongest link was for you. And we're going to have little kind of chat breaks after each story to hear from each other what stood out the most. Does anyone have any questions that they want to pop in the chat before we get started? Okay. Well, we'll look out just in case anything pops up. Okay, Jenny, will you read my bio for me?
Yes, happy
my
to.
turn first.
Yes. So Jessi Marino is the origin of wild essence and hedonism travel. And she is a SomaTender, a WellnessWitch, a HearthHolder, and PresenceKeeper. Jessi is an artist of primal embodiment and tender of soma gardens, who poetically pours presence over soul, whisper singing us home. She curiously untangles all we think we know for sure and crafts spaces for the emergent potential of limitless cycles of regeneration, creation, decay, and soul-fed living. I should say she wrote this as well, so this is how wonderful a writer she is. She's been guiding yoga and energy care while training hundreds of teachers around the world for 13 years. She's mentored dozens of budding priestesses, energy workers, and wellness guides in their personal development, professional skills, and conscious business practices since 2017. She's led sold-out retreats in 4 countries and is ecstatic to be home, deeply anchoring in Connecticut after living in Costa Rica for 2 years. She's an animist who tends to a deep kinship with the natural world, the seasons, and the agricultural pagan wheel of the year. A practicing witch, she believes that we weave our path in this life with a lot of trust and a pinch of magic. In all of her creations, she brews a decadent potion extracting the nectars of neuroscience, somatic psychology, polyvagal theory, presencing embodiment, eclectic self-awareness, Celtic witchcraft, folk herbalism, dark feminine wisdom, and sensual empowerment, to name a few. Attuned by songs of the soul of the world, Jessi shares herself as an artist, a guide, a poet, a muse, a mentor, a flame tender, a way seeker, with trust that the greatest symphonies unfold in the deepest presence. So without further ado, we have our first story from the woman who brought us all here together this evening, Jessi.
I just wanted to hear you read it. I'm not gonna lie, it's part of it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I just wanted to hear you read it. And sometimes when someone else sees you, and all of the people that I'm surrounded by and have asked to be a part of this, they see me, right? And sometimes when someone sees you and reflects that back to you, it can really just kind of give you the that you need to take the next steps. So I'm grateful for you. Thank you. So my story comes from Women Who Run with the Wolves. If you've never read this book, I hope you do. I really do. So this is kind of a story lineage for me, because my teacher, she was my teacher's teacher, and then also my teacher. I spent some time with Dr. E in Colorado in Singing Over the Bones like seminar. We were there for a couple of, how long? A week or so in Colorado, just listening to Dr. E tell stories with her wolf ears on and break things down and do some dream analysis. And it was really, really magical. And so I have both her version of the story, and I have my teacher, Daniel Dulsky's version of the story. And I was going back and forth between them. Which one do I read? Someday maybe I'll write my own. But we're going to start with Dr. E's for now. And so I'll give you a little origin of the story based on the way that she has it written. This is the Vasalisa story. So maybe you've heard it before. And if you have heard it before, amazing. Look for what mythic image stands out, because ultimately every chapter of your life, maybe you're a different part of the story. You're in a different part of the story. I found that when I reread things, I find myself in another character or in another aspect that I didn't see myself in the first time or the 50th time. So if it's a repeat for you, I'm excited for you, because maybe you'll see something new. So the Vasalisa story is told in Russia, Romania, Yugoslavia, Poland, and throughout all the Baltic countries, sometimes called the doll, sometimes Vasalisa the wise. We find evidence of its archetypal roots dating back to at least the old horse goddess cults, which predate the Greek culture. So this is where it comes from. And you may have heard versions of this that kind of resemble Cinderella, maybe. So without further ado, here we go. There once was, and once there was not, a young mother who lay on her deathbed, her face pale as the white wax roses in the sacristy of the church nearby. Her young daughter and her husband sat at the end of her old wooden bed and prayed that God would guide her safely into the next world. The dying mother called to Vasalisa, and the little child in red boots and white apron knelt at her mother's side. "Here is a doll for you, my love," the mother whispered. And from the hairy coverlet, she pulled a tiny doll, which, like Vasalisa herself, was dressed in red boots, white apron, black skirt, and vest embroidered all over with colored thread. "Here are my last words, beloved," said the mother. "Should you lose your way or be in need of help, Ask this doll what to do. You will be assisted. Keep the doll with you always. Do not tell anyone about her. Feed her when she's hungry. This is my mother's promise to you. My blessing on you, dear daughter. And with that, the mother's breath fell into the depths of her body, where it gathered up her soul and rushed out from between her lips, and the mother was dead. The child and her father mourned for a very long time. But like the field cruelly plowed under by war, the father's life rose green from the furrows again, and he married a widow with 2 daughters. Although the new stepmother and her daughters spoke in polite tones and always smiled like ladies, there was something of the rodent behind their smiles, which Vasalisa's father did not perceive. Sure enough, when the 3 women were alone with Vasalisa, they tormented her. They forced her to wait on them, sent her to chop wood, so that her lovely skin would become blemished. They hated her because she had a sweetness about her that was otherworldly. She was also very beautiful. Her breasts were bounding while theirs dwindled from meanness. She was helpful and uncomplaining, while the stepmother and stepsisters were, among themselves, like rats in the offal pile at night. One day, the stepmother and stepsisters simply could not stand Vasalisa any longer. Let us conspire to make the fire go out, and then let us send Vasalisa into the forest to Baba Yaga, the witch, to beg fire for our hearth. And when she reaches Baba Yaga, well, old Baba Yaga will kill her and eat her. Oh, they all clapped and squeaked like things that live in the dark. So that evening, when Vasalisa came home from gathering wood, the entire house was dark. She was very concerned and addressed her stepmother. What has happened? What will we do to cook with? What are we going to do in the dark tonight? The stepmother admonished, "You stupid child. Obviously, we have no fire. And I can't go out into the woods because I am old. My daughters can't go out because they are afraid. So you are the only one who can go out into the forest and find Baba Yaga and get the coal to start the fire." Vasalisa replied innocently, "Well, all right. Yes, I'll do that." So she went. The woods became darker and darker, and the sticks cracked under her feet, frightening her. She reached down in the long, deep pocket of her apron, and there was her doll that her mother had given her. And Vasalisa patted the doll in her pocket and said, "Just touching this doll, yes, I feel better." And at every fork in the road, Vasalisa reached into her pocket and consulted the doll. "Well, should I go left or should I go to the right?" The doll would indicate yes or no, this way or that way. And Vasalisa fed the doll some of her bread as she walked and followed what she felt was emanating from the doll. Suddenly, a man in white on a white horse galloped by and became daylight. Farther on, a man in red sauntered by on a red horse, and the sun rose. Vasalisa walked and walked, and just as she came to the hovel of Baba Yaga, a rider dressed in black came trotting on a black horse and rode right into Baba Yaga's hut. Swiftly, it became night. The fence made of skulls and bones surrounding the hut began to blaze with an inner fire, so the clearing in the forest glowed with an eerie light. Now, the Baba Yaga was a fearsome creature. She traveled in a chariot, not in a coach, but in a cauldron shaped like a mortar, which flew along all by itself. She rode this vehicle with an oar shaped like a pestle, and all the while she swept out the tracks of where she'd been with a broom made of a long dead person's hair. The cauldron flew through the sky with Baba Yaga's own greasy hair flying behind it. Her long chin curved up and her long nose curved down until they met in the middle. She had a tiny white goatee and warts on her skin from her trade in toads. Her brown-stained fingernails were thick and rigid like roofs, and so curled over she could not make a fist. Even more strange was the Baba Yaga's house. It sat atop huge, scaly yellow chicken legs and walked about all by itself, sometimes twirled around like an ecstatic dancer. The bolts on the doors and shutters were made of human fingers and toes, and the lock on the front door was a snout with many pointed teeth. Vasalisa consulted her doll and asked, "Is this the house we seek?" And the doll, in its own way, answered, "Yes, this is what you seek." And before she could take another step, Baba Yaga, in her cauldron, descended on Vasalisa and shouted down at her, "What do you want?" And the girl trembled. Grandmother, I come for fire. My house is cold and my people will die and I need fire. Baba Yaga snapped. "Oh, yes, I know you and your people. Well, you useless child, you let the fire go out. That is an ill-advised thing to do. And besides, what makes you think I should give you a flame?" Vasalisa consulted her doll and quickly replied, Because I ask. Because I ask." Baba Yaga purred. You're lucky. That is the right answer." And Vasalisa felt very lucky she had given the right answer. Baba Yaga threatened, "I cannot possibly give you fire until you've done some work for me. If you perform these tasks, you shall have the fire. If not," and here Vasalisa saw Baba Yaga's eyes turn suddenly into red cinders, "if not, my child, you shall die." So Baba Yaga rumbled into the hovel and laid down upon her bed and ordered Vasalisa to bring her what was cooking in the oven. In the oven was enough food for 10 people, and the Yaga ate it all, leaving just a tiny crust and thimble of soup for Vasalisa. "Wash my clothes, sweep the yard and the house, prepare my food, and separate the mildewed corn from the good corn, and see that everything is in order. I will be back to inspect your work later. If it is not done, you will be my feast." And with that, Baba Yaga flew off in her cauldron, with her nose as the windsock and her hair as the sail, and it became night again. Vasalisa turned to her doll as soon as the Yaga had gone. "What shall I do? Can I complete these tasks in time?" The doll assured her that she could, and to eat a little and go to sleep. Vasalisa fed the doll, and then she slept. In the morning, the doll had done all the work, and all that remained was the meal to be cooked. In the evening, the Yaga returned and found nothing undone. Pleased in a way, but not pleased because she could find no fault. Baba Yaga sneered. "You are very lucky, girl." And then she called on her faithful servants to grind the corn, and 3 pairs of hands appeared in midair and began to rasp and crush the corn. The chaff flew in the house like a golden snow. Finally, it was done, and Baba Yaga sat down to eat. She ate for a few hours and ordered Vasalisa on the morrow to again clean the house, sweep the yard, and launder her clothes. The Yaga pointed out to a great mound of dirt in the yard. In that pile of dirt are many poppy seeds, millions of poppy seeds. And I want in the morning to have 1 pile of poppy seeds and 1 pile of dirt, all separated out from each other. Do you understand? Vasalisa almost fainted. "Oh my, how am I going to do that?" She reached into her pocket and the doll whispered, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." That night, Baba Yaga snored off to sleep, and Vasalisa tried to pick the poppy seeds out of the dirt. After a time, the doll said to her, "Sleep now. All will be well." Again, the doll accomplished all the tasks. And when the old woman returned home, all was done. Baba Yaga spoke sarcastically through her nose. "Well, lucky for you that you were able to do these things." She called for her faithful servants to press the oil from the poppy seeds, and again, miraculously, 3 pairs of hands appeared and did so. While the Yaga was smearing her lips with the grease from her stew, Vasalisa stood nearby. "So, what are you staring at?" barked Baba Yaga. May I ask you some questions, grandmother?" asked Vasalisa. "Ask," ordered the Yaga. "But remember, too much knowledge can make a person old too soon." Vasalisa asked about the white man on the white horse. "Aha!" said the Yaga fondly. "That first is my day. And the red man on the red horse? Ah, that is my rising sun. And the black man on the black horse? Ah, yes, that third, he is my night." I see," said Vasalisa. "Come, child, come. Wouldn't you like to ask more questions?" wheedled the Yaga. Vasalisa was about to ask about the pairs of hands that appeared and disappeared, but the doll began to jump up and down in her pocket. So Vasalisa said, No, grandmother. As you yourself say, to know too much can make a person old too soon." "Ah," the Yaga said, cocking her head a little like a bird. "You are wiser than your years, my girl. How did you become this way?" "By the blessing of my mother," said Vasalisa. "Blessings!" screeched Baba Yaga. "Blessing? We need no blessing around this house. You'd best be on your way, daughter." She pushed Vasalisa out the door. "I'll tell you what, child. Here." Baba Yaga took a skull with fiery eyes from her fence and put it on a stick. "Here, take this skull on a stick home with you. There's your fire. Don't say another word. Just be on your way." Vasalisa began to thank the Yaga, but the little doll in her pocket began to jump up and down, and Vasalisa realized she must just take the fire and go. She ran for home, following the turns and the twists in the road with the doll telling her which way to go. It was night, and Vasalisa came through the forest with the skull on the stick, the fire blazing from the ear, eye, nose, mouth holes of the skull. Suddenly she became frightened of its eerie light and thought to maybe throw it away. But the skull spoke to her and urged her to calm herself and continue toward the home of her stepmothers and stepsisters. As Vasalisa came nearer and nearer to the house, her stepmother and stepsisters looked out the window and saw a strange glow dancing through the woods. Closer and closer it came. They could not imagine what it could be. They had decided that Vasalisa's long absence meant she was dead, so her bones must have been dragged away by animals, and good riddance. Vasalisa advanced closer and closer to home. And as the stepsisters and the stepmother saw it was her, they ran to her, saying they had been without fire since she left, and no matter how hard they tried to start one, it always went out. Vasalisa entered the house, feeling triumphant, for she had survived her very dangerous journey and brought fire back to her home. But the skull on the stick watched the stepsisters and stepmother's every move and burnt into them. And by morning, it had burnt the wicked trio to cinders. And there we have it. An abrupt ending to kick people out of the fairy tale. The end. Oh, I love this one. It's a good one. So before we share just a tiny bit, I just wanted to say that the bookmark that I was using to hold that, I didn't realize what it was. And then I opened it up, and it was actually a letter from my aunt that I lost this year. And it says, know that when I am beyond, I will be trying to join your circles. I will be the white witch in the antique gown. Love, Aunt Debbie. So she was there with us too. I would love to hear what stood out for each of you. I mean, we can go in the same order that we are doing our thing. So Jenny, what was the strongest link for you?
Thank you for asking. And yeah, thank you so much for reading. I have read that book years ago and not heard that story since reading it years ago. And it was so wonderful to hear you narrate it. I love the voices. Like they were there. I think what stood out for me most now, it was such a good question of like, I read this 10 years ago when I was a different version of myself, was the doll being her intuition, and that our gift is just listening to our inner nudges and tugs and jumpings. And that, I think many of us have the question of like, what's anxiety and what's intuition? And actually the journey of learning to hear our own inner nudges of truth is a superpower on our scary journeys, and it's worth cultivating. That stood out for me a lot. Perhaps when you narrated it, I really felt the doll in the pocket, you know. Yeah, so when the first time I read it, I felt her fear more. I definitely remember feeling the like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. And this time I felt the assuredness of the doll and the intuition guiding her.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
For me, this time, I was the parallel with Cinderella. I was kind of thinking about it as you were reading, and the difference between the idea of Baba Yaga and the fairy godmother kind of character. And although they sort of have a similar role in the story, they're kind of that kind of like real juxtaposition between like the witch who's literally going to kill you and just threatens to kill you at every moment versus the you shall go to the ball kind of fairy godmother thing. But the way that they both help her, but not in a fluffy way. Yeah, I didn't know. That was what was standing out for me this time.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. How are you, Chrissy?
So the first thing that really stood out was the imagery of the horses, the bringing the sun and the night. There's something about the nature personified in that, and the horse riders, that was really compelling for me, just symbolically. And then I also enjoyed how Baba Yaga, even though she was putting forth seemingly impossible tasks, when they were complete, there was a fairness to her. She was like, okay, and she recognized her for her wisdom as well. So that recognition of you are wise beyond your years also stood out for me. Piggybacking off of what you said, Jenny, with like following the intuition and having that recognized as, and then rewarded in a way with the death of her enemies.
I love it so much.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you each for your contributions, and you're welcome to drop in the chat what your strongest mythic image or link was. For me, it was also the intuition piece that I feel like I didn't know that was the point of the story, but I didn't feel it as viscerally as I felt it when I read it again recently. It was like, oh, okay, I'm living this right now, and so therefore this feels real, right? So thank you for hearing my story, and I am now going to introduce you to Jenny. Let me pull up this beautiful bio. Jenny Rose Lovett is a therapeutic coach, yoga and embodiment teacher, women's business mentor, writer, and amateur-ish storyteller. Her body is her greatest teacher and guides all her teachings of the Celtic wheel, seasonal living, animism, ecosomatics, and embodied mythology. She continues to specialize her study and practice in post-traumatic growth, both helping others heal their bodies and psyches, whilst asking the question, who am I when I am healed enough? Knowing oneself, unearthing the artist's heart, returning the stolen skin of the selkie that was temporarily lost through trauma, or simply abandoning oneself to false belonging. This is her area of fascination, passion, and what she coaches and mentors others through. Combining somatic embodiment, the Celtic wheel, and Sabbats, and mythology and storytelling, she guides both individuals and groups on unearthing their true self and living a life that is their own. For the world has too many writers who don't write. Artists who don't paint, selkies withering without their true skin. She's guided hundreds of women in her online courses in women's empowerment, goddess mythology, womb health, adrenal recovery, and post-traumatic growth, and has been guiding in-person women's circles, shamanic ceremonies, and therapeutic yoga for a decade. Hailing from Scotland, she draws deeply from the roots of her ancestral land and family tree, descended from bards, storytellers, professional dancers and actors, as well as wise women from Ireland, Scotland. Her work is always offered to the well-being of all beings with no exceptions, honoring her deep study in Indian yoga, Buddhist philosophy, and the magic of her own wild Celtic roots. I give you the Jenny.
Thank you so much, Jessi, and it's so good to be here with you all this evening. A small story before my story. My uncle is a Scottish storyteller. He's ever since I can remember wears the full Jacobite outfit you'll see in Outlander to go to the shops as well as tell stories. And I was about 4 years old in front of a fire at Christmas Eve, very idyllic with the whole family. And he comes in about midnight, having just done a storytelling gig, snow still in his beard and hair, and he leans down and gives me a book. And it's a book of stories by Duncan Williamson, who is one of the last remaining, he's now passed away, but Scottish storytellers of the tradition. He was illiterate, so he learned all his stories through hearing them and reciting them, gathered on the road, because he was also a traveling person. He didn't, those people don't exist anymore in Scotland. So he really was one of the last of the tradition. And it was a signed copy of the book. And it was on the front was the picture of the Selkie mother with the child in the water. And I loved the book, and I couldn't even read, and I just loved it so much. And this is my first time publicly doing storytelling of any kind, 34 years later. So I'm delighted, Jessi, for inviting me. Thank you. And I do teach a lot with stories and mythology. So I'm often telling stories within my courses. They've often been of goddess mythology, Inanna, and the Hindu goddesses. So I've done a lot of study in Hindu goddess mythology. But bringing it home to the roots, I thought I would read a story this evening by Duncan Williamson, who I feel is becoming my patron saint of my storytelling journey. So I will be reading it on the screen, so you might notice my eyes move a little, and that would not be how Duncan would do it, because like I said, it was all done orally from memory. So just excuse some of my reading. And this is one I'll be curious to know if anyone's heard it, because I only discovered it recently and I hadn't heard it. And I love the aspect of storytelling. I love because we actually had my uncle come to school when I was a little girl to tell stories, and my granddad used to tell them all the time. And in Ireland and Scotland and the UK Isles, probably all over Europe, traditionally, stories were told to children with warnings, with wisdom. And as a trauma specialist as well, stories presenced things like death and tragedy and mothers or fathers dying or siblings, because it was a lot more common in those days. And they were a place for children to learn about the world, to process trauma, and to receive lessons. Like there were so many little codes of like, you don't pick those flowers or the fairies will get you, So storytelling's become really popular, which I love, within the sort of Dr. E tradition of as a personal tool of self-reflection, but remembering that the origin of stories was actually a place of passing on wisdom of how not to die in the woods, literally, and how to avoid being kidnapped by the fairies, and how to process, the passing of a parent if it happened too early. So the story I've chosen is one that's more of that ilk. So I'm really curious how it lands for you all. So it's called The Coming of the Unicorn. Many, many, many years, long, long before your time or mine, when this country was very young, there was once a king. But this particular king was a great huntsman, and he lived with his wife in this great castle. The only thing that this king really loved to do was hunt. small animals, big animals. And in those bygone days, the land was overrun with animals. The king had his huntsman and he had his lovely wife, a beautiful palace and kingdom, and he was very happy. He got pleasure from hunting, but the king only hunted to supply food for his castle and the villages around his kingdom. He used to go on hunts 3-4 times a year to give his people enough food. But one particular day, this king gathered all his huntsmen together. They said goodbye to the womenfolk because they'd be gone for a couple of days, maybe more, to bring back all those animals they would salt for the winter. He bade goodbye to his queen as usual and took out his huntsmen, and they rode out. They rode for many days in the forest because in those bygone days, it was all mostly forest. There were not many townships or little villages along the way. The land was desolate, but overrun with animals of all description. Then the huntsman was always made sure that the king should get the best shot, anything that would come up before them. It was all bows and arrows in those days and swords. So lo and behold, what should stop the king? What should they corner but a bear, a great, great brown bear. The huntsman drew back and let the king have the first shot because he was a big bear and they knew it carried a lot of weight and it would be good for a lot of the villages. The king, who was a great archer, put his bow on his arrow to his shoulder and fired. He fired an arrow and hit the bear. The arrow struck in the bear's chest. And the bear stood up straight. When the blood started to fall from its chest, it put its paw to its chest where the arrow had entered, held it there for a few minutes. And the king was amazed. It stood straight there and took its paw and looked at the blood on its paw, and it looked at the king. And then it conked over and fell down dead. And the king was so sad at seeing this. He told his huntsman, "I'll pick it up and carry it back. We will hunt no more today." They carried the bear back to the palace, and the king said to the huntsman, "Take and divide it amongst the villagers, but bring me its skin." So naturally, the huntsman divided the bear up, passed it around to all the people in the village, and they brought the skin to the king. And the king gave the orders for the skin to be dried. Through time, the skin was dried, brought into the palace and put upon the floor. But every time the king looked at that skin, he got sadder and sadder. And the sadder he got, the less he thought about hunting. Now the next hunt was coming up, and the king did not want to go. He went into his chamber. The bugle was sounding. They called on their king, but lo and behold, the king would not go. And from that day on to the next months and the next months following, no more did the king join the hunt. His charger was waiting, his beautiful horses were in the stable, his bows and his arrows sharpened, but the king never went. The king was downhearted, he was broken. The queen was upset. "Why? What has happened to Her Majesty the king? What is the trouble?" The huntsman told her, "He has the bear skin." So she removed the bear skin from the floor of the palace. But it made no difference. The king had his meals, he had his lunch, he talked to the queen, talked to everybody, but he had seemingly lost all interest in life. He was a great sportsman and a great swordsman, but now he did not want to do those things. The queen was very upset. She could see her king fading away. He just wanted to sit in his parlor and be by himself. So one day she could stand it no more. She called the 3 palace magicians and told them the story I was telling you now. "Look, you must do something for the king. He doesn't cuddle me. He doesn't show me love. He just sits there completely lost. You must do something to excite him, bring him back to his own way, make him a king once more. His people are worried. He's never put in an appearance before his people. He doesn't join the huntsmen. He's in another world. What's happened to our king?" So the three wise men, the magicians of the palace, put their heads together and said, we know his trouble. It was the bear. Seeing the blood from the bear made him so sad that he does not want to hurt anymore. But if we could, between us, construct something that would excite him again, make him be a king again, then everything would be all right. Well, they said, what can we do to excite him? One said, if we could construct an animal, a special animal, who would be swifter than the wind, fiercer than the lion, fiercer than the boar that everyone was afraid of, and we would beg the king to help us, then maybe we could bring him back from his doldrums and make him king once again. The three magicians were very wise men, very clever. They worked in magic in the king's court, and they put their heads together, and one said, well, I could use my power to give it the body of a pony who will ride and fly swifter than the wind. And the second one said, I could give it the fierceness and the tusk of a boar. And the third one said, and I could give it the power and the tail of a lion. So, lo and behold, the three magicians constructed an animal between them. They gave it the beautiful, slender body of the swiftest pony that ever rode the earth. They gave it the tusk of a boar, but instead of putting it in its mouth, they put it on its forehead. And they gave it the determination and the power of the lion, but instead of giving it the lion's body, they put the lion's tail on it. And what did they say are we going to call it? Well, one said, we universied between us to construct it, so we'll call it a unicorn. And there, lo and behold, became the birth of the unicorn. The most beautiful, the most wonderful, the swiftest and fiercest creature of them all. Three wise men set it free to roam the kingdom and to interrupt every huntsman that ever went on their way. So naturally, the huntsmen, who had got tired waiting for their king and tired waiting for their food, knew that there was no way they could coax the king to go with them. So they went on the hunt without the king. But whenever they went to hunt, up jumped them before them this beautiful animal, white as white could be, a beautiful pony, a tail of a lion, a tusk of a boar straight from its forehead. And it ran before them. And they hunted and they searched for it, but it was fiercest and attacked them, and it threw them all off their horses. No way in the world could they hurt it. No way in the world could they catch it. So after hunting for weeks and months, they finally rode back to the palace, bedraggled and tired, with not one single thing, because of their interest to catch this animal. When one of the old court magicians walked out and said to them, what is the problem, men? Why have you come home from the hunt so empty-handed? And they said, we've come home empty-handed because we cannot catch anything, because an animal we have never seen in our life, with a horn in its head and the swiftness of a pony, with the fierceness of the lion and the tail of the lion, has come before us at every turn, and we tried to fight it, but it was impossible. Well, we must tell the king, said the court magician. We must tell the king about this animal. Maybe it will get him out of his doldrums. So they walked up and they told the king and they begged, Master, 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 dearest huntsman, dearest king, our majesty, we have failed in our hunt, and the people in this village are dying with hunger because we've no food for them. Why, said the king, you're a huntsman, aren't you? Haven't I taught you to hunt? But majesty, it's an animal, this being, this thing we've never seen in our lives, the swiftness of a pony and the horn on its head of a boar and the tail of the lion, who is as swift and so completely swift that drives before us. We just can't catch it. There never was such a thing, not in my kingdom. Well, yes, Our Majesty, there was not such a thing. There is now such a thing. He interrupts us and he interferes with our hunts, and every minute he disappears and then he's gone. And we just can't go on with the hunt, and our people are dying with hunger. You must help us. But then the king said, is it true? Tell me, please, is there something that I've never seen in my kingdom? Yes, Her Majesty, this is something you've never seen. This animal is bewitched. And at that, the king woke up. He rubbed his eyes and he thought of the bear no more. It was gone from him forever. If there is something that interrupts my people and interrupts my huntsmen, then I must find the truth. So the king calls for his horses, he calls for his bows, and he calls for his arrows, he calls for the bugle, and he calls for the huntsman. Ride with me to the forest and show me this wonderful animal that upsets you all. It won't upset me. And the king was back once more, and the people are happy and they blow the bugles. Everyone's gathered in the court to see the king off once more this year. They rode out on the great hunt. Lead me, said the king, to where you saw this animal last. So they led him to the forest, and the old wise men were sure it was there. They were sure it was there. Ah, there. Before him stood the magnificent animal, taller than any horse the king had ever seen, with its horn on its forehead and the tail of a lion and the swiftness of the wind. And the king said, leave it to me. It stood there and it looked at them. Leave it to me. And the king had a great charger of a mare. He rode after it for many, many miles. And the farther the king rode, the farther it went. And the faster the king rode, the faster it went, till it disappeared in the distance. And the king was lost. It was gone. Sadly and tiredly, he returned to the sound of his trumpets and his huntsmen. But the king had never even gotten close enough to fire an arrow at it. For days and weeks and months to pass by, the king hunted and the king searched for this beautiful animal, but it always just disappeared in the distance. It always rose before him, but he could never quite catch it. The king became obsessed with this animal. He had one thing on his mind. He must catch this animal. He called his great wise men in his court together. What kind of animal was roaming his kingdom? His huntsman tried to explain. Master, said one of the court magicians, it's a unicorn. A unicorn, said the king. How many unicorns are there on my land? And they said, only one, master, and it's up to you to catch it. But the king wasted his time. He searched for weeks, for months, and took his huntsmen. The people were dying for food, but the king could never, ever catch the unicorn. And then when the king became so sad and so brokenhearted again, he called his great men together. Look, this is a magic animal. I know in my heart that I'm a great huntsman, but I've done something I should never have done. Deprived all my people of food because we depend on the hunt. I've not killed a deer or killed a wolf or killed anything for months. But he told his huntsmen, you go out and hunt for the food for the villagers, spread it amongst the people while I talk to my sculptors and my masons. And to them he said, I know I can never catch that animal they call a unicorn. But there's nothing in the world I could love more than just to have a statue of him at my door where I could walk and see him. And they asked him, Master, we don't know. What do you want? Well, I will tell you, and I want you to make it for me. So he explained to the sculptors and the masons. It was like a pony with the tail of a lion and a horn on its forehead and swiftness of the wind. So they carved him out of some stone. They carved from stone two things like the king had told them to be and put them straight in front of the king's castle, so that every morning when the king walked down, there stood before him the thing that he hunted for many, many months, which he had never captured, the unicorn. The king loved to put his hand on one of his statues, two of them, one on each side of the door of his palace, like a beautiful pony with a horn on its forehead and the tail of a lion, and he walked around them. And from that day on, he hunted with his friends and distributed all the food that he had ever found, deer, bears, foxes, wolves. He hunted the lot. But from that day, the sculptors built the unicorns in front of his door. he never saw his unicorn again. But when the king passed on, for many years still remain the sculptures that he had made in front of his palace. And that is where your unicorn came from today. And that is a true story, and it's the end of my tale.
Oh, my heart.
Told in the more traditional Scottish style.
Oh, I love everything about this story. I'll share my mythic image if it's time.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing I forgot to say at the beginning, which you may not all know, is that the unicorn is the real national animal of Scotland. It's on our passports. So other places have lions, we have the unicorn, which I think is pretty cool. So that's all. Please, I'd love to hear Jessi.
Oh my God. Okay, so the whole story is my mythic image, but really the moment where the bear was bleeding hit me the hardest, because it felt for me like he was killing, or thought that he was killing, like an instinctual wild part of himself. And the grief of having lost that was what I experienced for me in my own life and body, as well as throughout the story of this, like, feeling like you might have killed something that could never come back, like that you had lost something irretrievable. And then to know that the unicorn was almost like born of that grief, and that it was this like impenetrable core essence of magic and instinctual primal power, like this like unkillable thing that transcends all time and space. And this like almost that it re-enchanted that in him, and helped him to remember that in himself. That was how that hit me, which makes a lot of sense for my life. So I love the story. Thank you so much. Sam?
Yeah, I'm still spinning. It was really beautiful. Thank you so much. I had two things that kind of popped in, and one of them was the that kind of that Jungian way of looking at all the characters in the story being part of yourself. And it reminded me of a book that I read years ago, where the author was talking about depression, and the way that you cure depression is that you become a detective, and you look at the way that one part of you has been killed off. So it's like a murder mystery almost, and there's a part of you that has had to die, and your job is to kind of figure out why. And so I was kind of thinking about the magicians almost being like detectives and trying to figure it out. But I was a little bit like, the detective sort of role that the magicians were playing, it was like almost like they got it wrong. There was like that, he's sad because he killed something, so we're going to give him something else to kill. And that kind of like, there was almost like a bit of a foolhardiness to the magicians in that way, of like, this is going to make it better because killing things makes stuff better. And then it was beautiful because he couldn't kill it, and there was something really magical in that for me.
Thank you.
Echoing what both of you shared, and what was also touching to me too was his realization towards the end of, oh, I've really gotten very tunnel visioned here. And I think not just with the unicorn, but just kind of noticing globally that tunnel vision. In the comments, people are speaking a lot to grief, and I agree with that perspective of like how grief kind of envelops, and there's something important to being there. And then something also just as important to that cycle, to have the capacity to pan out and see like, okay, well, I'm part of a system too. And how is my tunnel vision creating suffering for the system? And so I enjoyed how he was able to kind of pan in and pan out. And to find a place where he could appreciate, like kind of capture that beauty and capture the enchantment, as you mentioned, Jessi, with the sculpture, but then also like finding a way of integrating that into a functional way of being in the world, where, okay, now we're back to hunting and supporting the system as well.
Thank you. Could I share one piece myself as well on it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Please.
Part of the reason I chose it is I love that the old stories don't always have just neatly tied up happy endings. You know, it's not like, and they did all the right things and therefore their life was good. And I think much like Sam mentioned, you know, it is, well, we all mentioned it is like he killed something sacred. He made a mistake. He was okay to kill the other things, but he made a mistake. We make mistakes. He did a wrong move. And he was deeply in grief and he lost himself. And the queen is noticing it's his inner part that's like, how do I get back the king? The part that knows how to go out and work and earn money and feed me. Like, I need to get myself back. I'm like losing myself here and I can't sustain myself or my family. But I've killed something I shouldn't have killed. I've done something. I made a mistake. And I love that the story isn't like, and then it all went okay. And then it's like, well, they did then create this amazing muse. Like the unicorn is him finding his joy for life again, finding something new to inspire him. Because when we have a deep grief, typically the life we had isn't the thing that will bring us back. We need a new sense of joy. But then there is a sadness that he doesn't get the unicorn. There's that one line where it says like he wasted his time. And I love that the story isn't saying like, and it was all okay, so they brought the unicorn out and it's done. It was that they brought the unicorn out, but he also kind of wasted his time. And rather than send out his huntsman to hunt, and while he could pursue his muse, which we might see as like we create our own art, he lost the unicorn never showed up again, and he made the stone version.
Can you not hear Jenny? Did something strange happen?
Okay.
Oh, I hear you again. That was
Okay,
weird.
I'm back. Last little sentence. It's kind of a warning at the end of the story that like, you might go through a grief, you might rediscover your muse, but don't take it for granted. Like, actually, are you going to create art from it, or are you going to also let it escape? And that's why I like the old stories, because they're not sweet and neat. They've got these resonance of like warnings in them as well. So considering we're all artists coming together wanting to find our unicorns. Yeah.
Amazing.
And thank you everyone for your beautiful comments. I'm not had a chance to read them all, but I really appreciate that people are writing in the box as well.
Me too. I would like to be able to read them all out loud, but we want to make sure we have time for everything, so we'll have to read through them later. Thank you so much. Chris, you ready to intro Sam?
I am ready to intro Sam.
Go.
All right. So Sam is a British witch, artist, and storyteller. Wolf and Wing is her magical bookshop and a portal through which she also supports other writers to help more books to be born. The Selkie's Tale, a beautiful compendium of self-help fairy tales featuring stories by Sam, Jessi, and 7 other magical humans, is out now. And they are sharing it visually. Gorgeous. Gorgeous, gorgeous.
Thank you, Chrissy. Yeah, so this is the Selkie's Tale. I'm just going to give it a little boost. It's a story that, a collection of stories that Jessi and I created. It's summer before now, isn't it? Volume 2 is in the works at the moment. I'm working with some amazing people to write the next volume, which is coming out hopefully this spring, which is super exciting. So yeah, I am going to share a story today that I have written. It came to me this winter, and it was born of pulling on some threads, kind of touching on some British folklore things and some real and imagined history. I'm going to put like a little trigger warning on it. If anything in it feels too heavy for you right now, feel free to like mute me or fast forward to Chrissy, which I think is going to be a little bit lighter. It comes from a very like warm and gentle place, but we go to some darker, deeper places too. So this is the story of the Bone Woman and the Black Dog. Once upon a time, there was a woman, an old woman, an old bone woman. Her closest friends and kin were the dead, and she was a bridge between the living and the many paths that they might walk after their breath left their bodies. It was the old woman's job to tend to the bones. Her clan's ancestors had created the long barrow on the hill so long ago that no one could remember a time when its curving shape wasn't present on the horizon. Have you ever seen a long barrow? Picture an elongated grass mound, wider at one end than the other, over 70 meters long, It's flanked by ditches and it hides stone chambers inside, used by the first farming cultures in Northwest Europe around 6,000 years ago. They were used for long lost rituals and ways to honor their dead, and today they delight archaeologists with their mysteries. But long ago, our old bone woman's particular long barrow was full of bones, many carefully wrapped in bundles. She cared for them and prepared them for their transition. Those who loved to be free met with the birds who plucked away their flesh-bound memories, carrying their stories through the skies. The old woman would then gather the relics that remained carefully, sometimes finding them scattered in the woods nearby and gently carrying the bones home to the barrow. For the land-loving people, it was her job to lead the burying, carefully helping the earth and her diminutive workers take the flesh and the stories into herself before the bones were then dug and placed inside the barrow. For the fiery ones, the heat-loving ones, she would build the pyres and tend to the flames and ashes, carefully gathering them afterwards to deposit them into the barrow's chalk flanks. It was the job of the old woman too to choose the bones that could live outside the ground, the ones that could come back and be a part of village rites and rituals, and the ones that should stay buried or wrapped in the barrow. As her hands hovered over the white remains of the people she knew, the bones would speak to her, sending messages to her own marrow. A finger bone, a thigh bone, this skull. Take us out so we can help you. Let us rest so we can dream here. A rib, a vertebrae. She remembered in her youth the clan returning from their herding migrations each autumn to the village settlement beneath the barrow. The rutting deer would bark and bellow in the woods and welcome them home. Her family always came back to the smaller thatched wooden house on the edge. Now, when the village returned, she made her way to the house by herself, living alone for the most part. She didn't mind. She found time without younger, noisier people around gave her more time to dream. And she was never alone for long. Sometimes relatives of the dead would come and visit, sometimes stay, and she would care for the living too, honoring their connection to the bones she knew so well. Sometimes the spirits of the dead themselves would come and visit, and she would make room for them all. She was luckier than some, she knew. For her, death was not experienced as an absence or a silence or an empty space, as some of the grieving ones had expressed to her. She was forever talking to the bones, the bodies, and the spirits. She was always surrounded by the friendly, noisy dead. And the old woman was never short of food. The villagers brought her meals and snacks and treats. She made sure to care for the central fire in her hut, to keep the grieving cozy, sharing her ample food with any visitors who came. The old woman never went up to the barrow and her working hut alone. She was always accompanied by the village dogs, made hopeful by the scent of flesh leaving bone. Curious noses sniffing, she made bargains with the dogs over which white treasures they could borrow and which bones really needed to stay where they wanted to stay. Sometimes she traded with them for deer bones or a piece of antler. She adored her creature kin with their deep brown eyes and communicative ears, and sometimes they would come and sleep by the fire in her house in a big happy pile of snoring fur. She knew they and their fox and wolf kin were just as noble and important as the carrion birds in helping the ancestors' journeys beyond the physical realm, journeys into and through the intangible worlds that she visited in her dreaming life. "Keep me with you," the skull of one of her favourite dogs had said to her, and she waited until the skull was perfectly white before tying him to the top of her staff. He was very good company wherever she roamed. And before the big red-headed chief had died, his wife had seen the largest dog in the Barrowlands pack, a big black beast with a wild woolly pelt, silhouetted against the crown of the hill. She had come running back down, a sense of foreboding sitting in her heart. All appeared to be well. "Hold on," cautioned the dog's skull staff. And in the morning, their old red chief breathed no more, choosing instead to stay in his dreams. The black dog was the most wary of people the old woman knew, so he was rarely spotted by villagers other than herself, and this made sightings of him more meaningful. Days he chose to reveal himself to them would later prove to be the days that preceded the revealing of something: a death, a birth, a betrayal, a loss, a visitor. The old woman prepared the body of the chief diligently and laid him out on the wooden scaffold for the red kites and their friends, as he had wished for. Once the villagers had left the ceremony, the great black dog came under the moon to sit with him. No canines touched the chief's body. Only the black dog and the man himself knew the stories that they shared that night. The old bone woman called the black dog Shadow, for she had seen him appear from beneath the trees as if the shade itself had gained legs and walked away to go hunting hares. She wasn't really sure even if he was a dog, in the sense of the other dogs that slept on her floor, or literally a shadow, but she considered him a friend either way. He appeared more often to her than anyone else, and they had a kind of understanding, a language of mutual nods and shared glances. Shadow was choosy about where he would roam. He wasn't exactly part of the village pack, but he never left the Barrowlands. She had caught sight of him on the boundary of their village enclosure, that he would never cross and enter. And he apparently didn't like to get his paws wet either, because if she forded the stream to get to the meadow on the other side and gather herbs, he would often be waiting back on the village side of the water and disappear when she crossed again safely. Some of the other dogs would walk with her all the way, delighting and splashing in the water, but never Shadow. Each morning, the dogs and the birds would awaken with the sun as it glowed through the deerskin stretched over the vent near the apex of her roof, and the glow got gradually later through summer and winter, through autumn and winter. Their sounds were one of the ways that she knew to start her own day. Birdsong and scritching, chop licking and paws padding gently nearby brought her back from her dreams into the furs and straw of her bed, and she coalesced back into the structure of her own bones. As this year shifted towards the darkest night, those bones felt harder to come back to, harder to move each morning. The dog's skull staff would grin, "Welcome back!" and she would force herself up to tend the fire that had been dampened down to glow overnight, feeding the flames until the warmth and light convinced her that she could be warm again. She made tea with dried meadowsweet and nettle, the essence of summer bound in their leaves, and she sipped it from her ceramic beaker. As they headed towards midwinter, more people came from the surrounding valleys to join together in feasting. She left the celebrations to the younger folk, preferring to spend time with the few others who did her work. During the scant daylight hours, they would gather the hungover youth, their heads foggy with mead, to clean out the ditches of the barrow and do any repairs that were needed. There was never a shortage of volunteers, the young men striving to impress the young women with feats of strength, the old men advising on how they should do it, leaning on their sticks and offering sage words, and the old women laughing at all of them. It wouldn't be long before it would be another's turn to care for the bones, as she had for so many years. No one suitable had yet presented themselves to her. She believed she would feel that familiar calling in her marrow when near them, as if their bones were speaking to one another under their respective skins. So she waited. But it was, however, becoming more pressing, and the ancestors were becoming cranky and worried that there would be no one there to care for them. "You need to find someone soon, old woman. We can't be left here all alone," grumbled the bones. "They're right," chimed in the dog skull staff, "but I know why you're waiting." Shadow, in the end, was the one who found her apprentice. She saw the unmistakable shape of the big dog sitting on top of the ridge above some trees. He looked at her for a few heartbeats, then looked back into the trees, and he repeated the action 3 times. "He's got something to show you," the dog's skull on her staff said, and she grumbled to them as she leant heavily on the staff to climb. Shadow was gone by the time she reached the top, but below in the trees, a youngster from the village in a warm reddish cloak was singing, kneeling in the leaf litter. The old woman began to slowly and carefully move closer to the child, realizing as she did so that they had found the body of a little red squirrel with long fluffy ears. And they were singing to the creature as they arranged a pattern of leaves and acorns and stones around them. There was such a tenderness in the youngster. They weren't playing, but communing, and the old woman's bones began to thrum. The child at that moment seemed to feel something too, and they turned to smile as they sang, tears in their eyes, but smiling, holding out a hand to the old woman. Her joints creaking somewhat, she sang too as she joined her new friend on the forest floor, and somehow seemed to know the song despite never having heard it before. The old woman used her hands and the end of her staff to dig a small hole in the soft mud, and to gather some pebbles and flint, and essentially build a miniature version of the stone temple inside the Long Barrow Hill, here in the woods. The youngster joined in, and they carefully laid the delicate body of the red squirrel to rest, surrounded by grave goods suitable for a squirrel chief, acorns and hazelnuts, leaves and snail shells. Still singing, the woman held her hands over the small creature and felt the stories move through her fingers. The youngster copied her, mouth open with joy when they evidently could feel it too. Yes, yes, I will sleep now here in this bed you have made, thank you, communicated the squirrel to them both. So they covered over the chieftain squirrel and finished their song, sitting for a moment in the quiet as they felt the earth welcome her child home. Simultaneously they rose, the youngster holding out a hand to help the old woman to her feet. This one, said the dog skull's staff. I like this one. They headed back together to the bone woman's house, and the fire and the food and the dogs, and that was the beginning. The old woman went to talk to the new apprentice's family and explain that the bones had chosen them as their new keeper. The parents were overjoyed and a little afraid, for it was a heavy responsibility for one so young. But the youngster was serious and sweet and thoughtful, and everyone knew it would be a perfect fit. The old woman began to see Shadow more after that, drawing her attention to things, seeming to gaze at the flocking starlings or the roosting rooks. He appeared nearby and would gaze at her too, but disappeared again so quickly if anyone else was around. That winter and into early spring, she saw him every day, at least once a day. And the last night, when they stayed in their settlement before the community began to wander again, she was certain Shadow had crept into her house just before the sky began to lighten with a spring dawn, and curled up on the floor next to her bed. She had awoken to see him walk in and lie down, but he was gone when she rose in the morning, and she wasn't certain if it had been real. The advent of the spring equinox heralded the time for them to move again, and the apprentice helped the old woman with her things, carefully paying attention to all that was needed to travel, soaking it in. When they were wandering, the bonework was a little different, and the apprentice spent that spring and summer learning the ways. As the clan moved together from pasture to pasture, they gathered their sheep and goats, travelling by ridgeline above the dangerous forests where bears and wolves roamed. Life and death carried on through shifting landscapes. Bind me to the flames and take my ashes to the barrow, sang the body of an elder man who coughed his last cough. Scatter me to the winds, sang the bones of a sky lover who died in a place they adored with their whole heart. The red kites and eagles came to help. I want to stay with you, said the bones of a man who had had an accident and been snatched away too soon. The birds helped to clean them, and the old woman and her apprentice carefully bundled what remained to travel with his family, precious and loved. Although the pair of bone keepers held the rites and led some of the rituals, they knew there was no one right way to the work. Each person's story was unique, and the wishes of the bones were unique too. Bury me, carry me, burn me, use me, sing to me, play to me. The clan was growing to like and trust the young apprentice, and the old woman felt something loosen in her, like a bundle of twigs coming untied and spreading. A tension she hadn't even been aware of had gone. And as the bindings around her heart slackened, she found herself laughing more, relaxing and talking as the youngster tended to things, playing with the children, throwing sticks for the dogs that travelled with them. And she found herself missing her Shadow, who always stayed near the Long Barrow, and wondered what the land in his valley looked like and felt like in these summer months. As the season moved on and the sun lingered in the sky, a sickness caught the clan, and the bone keepers became busier. When herbs and the magic of the wise folk eased pain but couldn't cure, the old woman and her young helper worked quickly to meet the body's wishes as best they could. And so it was, until the old bone woman awoke one morning only in spirit form. The birds still sang with the dawn. She gazed at her own hand, translucent and sparkling like dust in a sunbeam. Her knuckles and skin were young again. She turned and saw with surprise that Shadow was standing next to her in their little travelling skin tent. His tail wagged and he opened his mouth to pant at her, tongue lolling, sparkling and ethereal too. Her apprentice looked to the bone woman's frail body left behind on her pallet bed and back to her now shimmering form and nodded. No words were needed. Her bones would be picked clean by her bird kin, bundled and returned to the barrow. She smiled at the clan's new bone keeper as they picked up her dog's skull staff. I like this one, the skull grinned. And then the bone woman turned and ran out the door, sure-footed and fast again. Shadow sprinted ahead of her as they ran over the soft meadow grass, up into the trees, running back home. And that's the end.
Wow. Wow.
I hope it wasn't too heavy.
Wow.
Incredible.
Oh my God.
Sorry, it went a bit.
Beautiful.
Oh, it's a
Beautiful.
bit dark.
I felt myself in all of it. I'm struggling to choose which thing hit me the hardest. I think I'll go with the thing that made me cry and we'll go from there. Is it okay if I share my mythic image?
Yes, please.
It surprised me quite a bit. It was the moment when the skull said, "Keep me with you." That was my mythic image. And I'm gonna probably comb through it more. I know that there's like the logical part of my brain that remembers things I've been taught, says things about how bones, are the most permanent part of us, right? The thing that outlives almost everything else. So very often related to spirit. So there's like a logical part of that, but there was something really visceral that I felt in that keep me with you moment of like, of what that meant. It ended up going on her like totem staff and then was passed. And so it almost was like I felt something that then made sense afterwards, which was a cool time travel-y moment, because I was like, I don't know why this moment hit me as hard as it did. And then I was like, oh, it ended up being the actual torch that was passed too. And the other moment that really struck me was when, as the birds were picking the flesh and the stories were coming out of the bones and into the bone woman, and it was almost like she had to be the keeper of those stories, and how important it is for us to keep stories alive and continue what we're doing right now. So it was a really cool full circle moment for me. So thank you so much for your story. I'm so happy that you read the one you wrote. I'm inspired. Jenny.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Thank you so much. Such a gift that it's one written by you. And I loved feeling you reading it like from your heart. The thing that really stood out for me was this impermanence and permanence. You've got it there in so many layers, but the bones being the permanent thing that remain. And the mythic image for me was the very end when she dies and she's young again. And it's this thing that all old people say that, like, I mean, I'm getting older, I'm getting grays and wrinkles, and I see old photos of myself and I'm like, that's me. Who's this?
Yeah.
Like, no matter how old you get, you feel like you're the 13-year-old. Like, that feels the most true, like you're forever young inside. And it's, yeah, that sense of like permanence of self and impermanence of the body, and the soul and the bones both having their own impermanence. I won't say more than that because I'm also still digesting it, but that final image was so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was also many things that stood out for me about the story. One was that there was an honoring of how people wanted their transition, like the transition of the bones, like honoring via each element, their respective elements. A shadow, you had mentioned that the bone keeper is of this bridge. Shadow for me also felt like a bridge as well, because its form was in the physical, people could see it, but also it felt like a guide into whatever's next. And then I also really enjoyed the moment where she found her predecessor, like the one to come after the child, and how often it's not just the crone wisdom, it's also the childlike wisdom, and how the gift can be carried from an early age on. And so I just thought that was beautiful, like the juxtaposition of the small child and this crone bone woman was really beautiful too. Tickled me.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense actually, with your inner child work and stuff. I hadn't really kind of noticed that when I was creating that character. I was like, there's something important, they need to be young, and that's that kind of balance in the relationship between those two, a bit like Baba Yaga and Vasalisa as well. That kind of the child and the crone, they meet each other so often in stories, don't they? And there's something really special about that. I love that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Are you ready to intro the Chrissy?
I am. I'm so honored. So Chrissy Marie is a trauma-informed embodiment practitioner, inner child liberator, breathwork facilitator, and founder of the Art of Aliveness podcast. She comes alive helping achievers grow up their inner people pleaser, take themselves way less seriously, and find sparks of joy in their lives again. Her work is rooted in the art and science of play, efficiency, and simplicity. Her clients say they're drawn to her for her authenticity and ease, and stay with her because she unlocks this in themselves. You can find her working out, wandering in nature, or dancing wildly at the steering wheel. Also on roller skates. It's one of my favorites. I give you the amazing Chrissy.
Thank you so much. So the story I'm going to read was written for me, and by my dear friend Yana Zedze, and she is an incredible story writer. She had this offering called Words for You, and the request was send me symbolism that feels really relevant to who you are and what you'd like your story to be about. So I sent her a lot of symbolism that resonates with my essence, and I asked her to write a story about my essence. And there's some inner child themes in here you will see. The story is called Delight. And I'm also going to be reading off of my computer as well. So, hair, the color of garnet and flames. Eyes, the color of a forest stream. Her name is Dancing Light. Delight, for short. Where she lives, a mountain stands. The mountain has a mouth, and all the mountain speaks is peace. Delight's life is a simple one. By day, she saunters in the sunlight on a tarn. Her melodies mix with birdsong, and she dances with the waggle of honeybees' bums. By night, she dreams by the mountain's mouth, mutters madness to the moon, and lets the mountain's unending wisdom wrap her gently. She's friends with the world around her, and harmony is an everyday hum in the underbelly of all things. One morning, though, a cold wind swept across her home, and Delight woke to a peeping cry. Delight, Delight, it's urgent, we have a problem. It was Ladybird shouting at the top of her teeny tiny voice. Hummingbird has returned and needs help. Hummingbird was one of Delight's dearest friends. Every year they reveled together in all that was sweet before migration called for another season of separation. Anytime that hummingbird returned to the mountain, it was as though no time had passed. They suckled nectar, sang songs, and shared stories of the many moons that they had been apart. And together they were the epitome of happiness. This time, though, Delight could feel that something was amiss, because she'd never seen Ladybird so worried before. Ladybird led the way to a tiny birch tree nest where hummingbird slept. Delight's tummy lurched when her eyes caught sight of her sweet feathered friend. Wings that were once magenta and azure were turning gray. Not the kind of wisdomy gray that blesses the crown of an elder, but rather an infectious, nothing, void of hope gray that drained a being of all zest with just one glance. What happened? She coaxed, placing her soothing hand upon Hummingbird's wing. Her friend brought news of a troubled spirit, Paoda, from faraway lands who threatened to swallow the light of the world. Paoda twisted inside so intensely that his imploding burden became a roaring threat. It was believed that even Paoda prayed for the world to be saved from the effect of his unstoppable internal churning that was devouring it of all color and charm. Delight noticed that the nest her friend was laid in, and the leaves of the tree too, were also turning the same lifeless gray. Urgency swelled as she rattled her fire mind for solutions. Hummingbird, I will be back soon, she assured. I know who will have the answers. Delight bolted through bracken and over boulders to her resting place by the mountain's mouth. Mountain, won't you please tell me how I can save our beloved Hummingbird from the grip of the troubled spirit, Paoda? It seems my friend is growing weary, without taste for honeysuckle or our usual songs. I've never seen colors turn lifeless this way, and I'm fearful. She looked right and left. All around her, Paoda's gray had begun to gobble the land. She looked down to her own clothes to see the yellow of her dress fading too. The fear that she had announced to the mountain gripped her tight. Paoda's troubles were to seize everything she loved, and her heart raced, desperate. A calm and steady voice answered from the mountain's mouth. Delight, to release your loved ones, the land, and yourself from the grip of Paoda, you must be like me. Be like Mountain? What do you mean? Delight puzzled, angst gripping her. Do you mean I must be big? How could I ever be big as you? In silence, the mountain smiled, letting Delight find her own thoughts. She frustrated over the impossibility of growing as ginormous as the mountain. Maybe you mean strong? Do you mean, Mountain, that I must be as strong as you? However is that possible? She panted, bringing Hori to her breath, while the mountain smiled silently. Ah, I know, Delight flapped, hastened to have a solution. Mountain, I think I know. You're always in the same place. You mean to say I should sit still, just like you. So the mountain watched as Delight found a small rock to perch upon, assured that she had found the right answer. And determined, she closed her eyes, intent upon being just like the mountain. Still like the mountain. Just like the mountain, she muttered under her breath. Her fluttering mind struggled to keep still. Just like the mountain, still like the mountain. Her nose twitched at the smell of a nearby puddle. Come on, Delight, you can do it. Still like the mountain, she affirmed, hearing the splash of a nearby frog. She giggled and then gritted her teeth, trying with all her might to stay still like the mountain. She clenched her small body and clawed at her mind to avoid distraction, but the frog's joyful ribbit interrupted her again, and Delight chirped back with a grin, and then a little melody popped from her mouth. Eyes still closed, she lolloped her head from side to side, trying to keep rhythm with the song that slowly built with each repetition, and there was no stopping her now. The feeling of sun rays on her skin coaxed a happy feeling in her feet, and she forgot entirely about her commitment to stillness. Neglecting her promise to return to Hummingbird, she swept herself into a fretless trance. Her hands frolicked in the breeze, her ears listened merrily to small skaters across the water nearby. The rustle of reeds reset her heartbeat, and all the weight of fear washed from her shoulders. She became light again, a dancing light on the tarn. The squeal of a stepped-on flower sapped her out of her easy space. I apologize, little flower, Delight whispered, kissing it better. Slowly, it dawned on her how terribly she had failed to be still, like the mountain. And she hung her sorry head low. A tear welled up and fell on her pretty yellow dress. It was yellow again. Lifting her face, she looked across the land to see color creeping back in. Ladybird flew over and landed on her shoulder. Delight, color is returning. And Delight was confused. How did this happen? The peaceful mountain said that she must be still. So she turned to the mountain's mouth, bewildered, and the calm and steady voice spoke again. That's right, Delight. You did it. In the face of the troubled spirit, you learned to simply be. And there is only one thing that can heal Pauda, and you found it. You found your version of peace. The end.
I love it. Oh, I love
So
it.
sweet.
Yeah. I had so many like stimmy moments of like, oh, I love it. Oh, I love it. Do you have any final thoughts before we give you our mythic images?
I'd love to hear your mythic images.
Okay. So my favorite one was when she was going
Beast.
just because I've had so many moments in my life of thinking I could muscle my way through or like logic my way through or figure words my way through something that just had to be felt and something that it was just so much of an undoing of everything that brought the color back in. And it also made me think of a Rainbow Bright cartoon that I used to watch when I was little, where everything got gray and then all the color came back in. There's a unicorn in that as well. Just inner child weird circle moment for me of all those things happening. But that hit me in a lot of ways. So the mountain visual and the wisdom of the mountain being like that inner council piece of like, you already know, like you already know it's in there. I'm just gonna wait. I'll be patient while you figure it out.
Yes.
Thank you. That's mine.
Thank you.
Yeah, I obviously, Chrissy, I'm just getting to know you, so I don't know if this is your normal getup, but the fact that you're speaking from a very colorful, like you're in the story, you know, there's like rainbows on your side, and there's a mountain, and there's deer, and it's just like,
Oh my God, that's right.
yeah, like all the so it was a very immersive story, and I really enjoyed like the storyteller, so beautiful. The I really appreciated the initial framing, which really reminded me of the old African myth where it's like spider, and you know, it's like there's ladybird, it had this really origin story feeling because of that. You know, it was like the land before time feeling, the beginning of things, you know. And it is, yeah, the mythic piece for me was that really it's in everything, the good versus the bad. It's been there since the beginning as well, since the origin. It's in, you know, Lord of the Rings and like all of these epic mythics is like the light and the dark. So again, I won't say much more just now. There's so much I could say, but I love that. It had such a origin story origin myth for you. If it's your story, it's so beautiful. And thank you for speaking it from such a rainbow environment.
Thank you for that.
Mm.
Yeah, it was so you, it was so beautiful, and it just like it was like you telling yourself in a really magical way. And I think the bit that like hit me like you know, you get those tuning fork kind of moments in a story. For me, it was that bit when the mountains first says, you know, you need to be like me, and she's like, what, big like you? And I felt like, although the story then focused on the stillness, I think there's so many moments in our lives where we feel like to fix the problem, we're too small a lot of the time. And that, oh God, you know, it's that kind of moving the mountain kind of feeling of we're never going to be able to do this. And that just felt very relevant at the moment for just being in the world and everything just feeling like, I can just fix this, but it's so big and I'm so small. And that just felt really relatable. And particularly with like the hummingbird and the ladybird also being really small creatures, that felt really powerful.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, when my friend reflected back, she had shared that when she was writing it, that powder spirit it represents fear, symbolizes fear, and how often the fear of the fear is what amplifies the fear. And so I really loved, Jessi, you mentioned like that moment where she realizes like she can't strong arm herself into supporting her friend. She's going to drop into what feels most true for her, which is that like just being fully immersed in the moment and what's here, and finding joy amidst the fear. Like even though everything was turning gray, she still like listened in for like the bird song, and so that both of those things happening at once I really loved as well.
I'm obsessed. I love you all so much, and I'm so grateful for each of these incredible stories, and I want to honor and respect everybody's time and my bladder, and I'm sure all of your bladders, and the water in, water out scenario that needs to happen, and whatever else is coming. I feel like we could stay here for hours, which is why this is the thing. Like we could do this and drink tea and eat. We're going to do this. Is kind of like the point of that's what next. The point of what we want to do, right? This is what Hearth of the Muse is. This is what a lot of the offerings that you guys offer is. This experience of being really present with the moment by moment combing through of the way that these stories are hitting us each differently in different ways. And so while we won't be able to stay on and hear from you, which I would love to be able to do, I would love to invite you to come into the Wild Essence Facebook group and share any bits and bobs that you want to. If you make a piece of art out of your mythic images, maybe weave all 4 mythic images that stood out for you and make a dance, make a song, make a piece of art, share it, and know that there is a space where we connect pretty consistently in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send everyone an email that has the recording of this beautiful, unbelievable experience and links so that you can find all of the people who shared, and you can be in their world and be near to them and share space and moments with them, and so that you guys can inspire each other. That's all I could have ever hoped for. This was way more than I ever imagined it being, and my body's still processing, so I'm not going to try to do too many words. But if any of you have any last little bits or that you'd like to zap in there, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'm going to end the recording and I'll say goodbye for now, and I'll see you guys really soon. Does anybody else have a bit they want to share?
Just feeling grateful.
So am I. So am I. I love you all. Thank you so much. And I'm very excited to read through your comments and hear from you in the group. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you soon.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.